am ashamed as a Republican to what our president has done to our country. I voted for him in 2016, and I will not vote for him regardless if there's anybody even running against him at this point.
He's a clown king. He's incompetent and narcissistic and a liar, and all of this demonstrably so.
You know, Democrats may be angry, but true Republicans are pissed. We want our party back.
Those ordinary voters who have buyer's remorse over Donald Trump, and they're saying they will not make the same mistake twice. Now, a growing number of establishment Republicans have also turned against Trump. The list includes the last GOP president before Donald Trump and the prior Republican nominee. Times reporting that both George W. Bush and Senator Mitt Romney will not support Trump this time around. And Colin Powell, who was Bush's Secretary of State, he is not only not going to support Trump, but he is firmly on Team Biden.
The Republican Party, the president, thought they were sort of immune. They can go say anything they wanted. And the one word I have to use with respect to what he's been doing for the last several years is a word I would never have used before. I never would have used with any of the 4 presidents I've worked for. He lies. He lies about things. And he gets away with it because people will not hold him accountable. I'm very close to Joe Biden on a social matter and on a political matter. I've worked with him for 35, 40 years, and he is now the candidate, and I will be voting for him.
And I want to bring in our guest, Sarah Longwell. She co-founder of Republican Voters Against Trump, and she's also been associated with Republicans for the Rule of Law. We'll talk about them in a minute. But Sarah, thank you for a few minutes. And at one point you saw Colin Powell get choked up. For a lot of folks, they're emotional about this, not just because they thought maybe they voted for the wrong guy 3.5 years ago, but they don't recognize their party anymore. Have you found, since you've done this project, that for a lot of people, this isn't some political transactional decision, but part of them feels that they've been abandoned by the party they grew up with?
Yeah, I think what we find is that Republican voters are actually angrier than Democrats. They feel personally invested in the idea that a con man hijacked their party and then began injecting poison into the country. And so I think sometimes, there's a lot of people talking about our project saying, why don't Democrats make ads that are this hard hitting? And I think it just comes from the fact that as Republicans, we feel deeply betrayed by this president and by so many of the other, Republican politicians who we thought were going to be guardrails on this presidency, who we thought would stand up when things got really bad and disavow the things that Donald Trump was doing. But of course, they haven't. They've been entirely complicit. They've capitulated at every step. And so now what we're doing with our project is collecting all of these voices of rank and file Republicans and letting them explain so that the Republican Party hears them why they're no longer voting with them, so that they can help these Republican politicians understand that they are driving away decisive margins from the party by having gone all in on Trump.
Sarah, I was interested to find that these aren't all long-term anti-Trumpers who even before 16 said never in a million years, these are bridged too far. Some of these are recent converts. What was the tipping point for so many of them?
I think it's different for different people, but you're right. There's a number of people who have joined our project who actually voted for Donald Trump in 2016. And I think one of the things that you would hear them say is that it wasn't that they voted for Trump, it was that they voted against Hillary Clinton. And after now experiencing 3 years of what Donald Trump has done, they've realized that we need a change now. And I'll say one other thing. I think I've heard from a lot of people since the coronavirus, coupled then with the economic crisis, and then this racial crisis that we're experiencing. It was one thing for Donald Trump to be president when the economy was kind of coasting along and everything was okay. But when a crisis hit, that was when his manifest unfitness, I think, became apparent to more voters. And so I've actually heard from a lot of people in relation to our project that when it became about life and death and when leadership was really needed, it wasn't there with Donald Trump, and that was a tipping point for them.
I spoke to a lot of folks who were attached to your group, Republicans for the Rule of Law, former federal prosecutors, et cetera. And there was palpable offensiveness that they found to a misuse of governmental power. Similarly, General Mattis and now I think there's 89 other former defense officials across the political spectrum, the idea that the military would be a political pawn and to be exercised even against American citizens' constitutional protected rights of speech and assembly, as you said in the beginning, there's a palpable level of just how dare he not just do what he's doing, but use my party in the commission of it. And again, you've been very involved with this, but both from the people who've spent a lifetime in public service, whether wearing a uniform or as a prosecutor, those are among the people I've seen angriest.
Because Donald Trump doesn't stand for what we stand for. So we have committed, if you're a Republican or a constitutional conservative, the things that you care about, limited government, fidelity to the Constitution, fiscal restraint, moral decency, any of those things, Donald Trump is anathema to those things. And so I think that people who especially have put time and effort and sweat and money into the Republican Party over the years, they're the ones who feel most betrayed by Donald Trump because he reflects none of the values that we reflect. And frankly, when Joe Biden gave that speech last week and he talked about who we are as Americans and about America being imperfect but always striving to be better, that sounded more conservative and more pro-America than anything I have heard out of Donald Trump over the last 3 years. And I think that's how a lot of conservatives feel. Look, there's a lot of people who are in it for Donald Trump because he punches back, he owns the libs. And there are people who I guess find that appealing. But for a lot of us who've been involved in the party, that's not why we got into politics. That's not what matters to us. And so Donald Trump just in no way reflects our value system.
When you look at the political map and also where you folks are targeting, I know there's $10 million that you're prepared to spend in both broadcast and digital. The target, I assume, it's white, college-educated, suburban voters. You look at the map, is that population big enough to change a national, let alone some of these Senate races?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the last election was decided by 77,000 votes in 3 states. I mean, that's a packed NFL game. I think, and you saw it in 18. I mean, in 2018, so many of these college-educated suburban voters came out and voted for Democrats, many of them for the first time in their lives, and they flipped 40 House districts that were formerly in Republican hands. And so if the Democrats turn their voters out and then these right-leaning independents and sort of Romney and John McCain, college-educated voters in the suburbs, come out in Michigan, in North Carolina, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Florida, not only will it be decisive, but looking at the polling right now, it could be a demolishing of Trump, which is actually important because just to eke out a victory against Trump really isn't enough. It has to be an outright repudiation of everything that he stood for, because if the Republican Party is going to recover from this moment, it's going to have to be taught a pretty hard electoral lesson about this flirtation with populist nationalism by putting somebody totally incompetent in office. And so you have to root that out decisively. It can't be close.
Well, I wish your group the best of luck. The ads are compelling, and I encourage people to check them out. Sarah, thank you for a few.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, something you understandably may have missed while our country has been focusing on the protests and the COVID outbreak. Senator Kamala Harris absolutely obliterating her Senate colleague Rand Paul because the Kentucky Republican is actually stalling anti-lynching legislation in the year 2020 in the U.S. Senate. When we come back, I'll show you what she had to say.